How to be fair with your blended family. Hi, I'm Claire from the Yanowitz law firm, where we've been helping blended families promote harmony for the last 29 years. We're here to help you protect what matters most. Naturally, blended families have this tug and pull oftentimes with harmony, especially when people maybe get married later in life and they have kids from prior marriages or relationships, and maybe the new spouse didn't raise the children, and so the new spouse enters the scene, and there's this tug and pull in blended families on you want to take care of your spouse, but you want to take care of your kids. You want to be fair to both, and sometimes that's kind of a hard thing to do, to be fair to both. And so there's a couple of things to think about when you're thinking about how to be fair. And I find that blended families are definitely not a one size fits all. People do all sorts of creative things with blended families. But here are some things to consider when you're considering creativity and how to be fair with your blended family. First, should the kids get money at your death even if your spouse survives you? We have done this a number of times where we give a dollar amount or a certain percentage amount to the kids, even if the husband or wife is still alive. And there's a couple of good reasons for this. First, the children, don't have to wait until the step parent dies to inherit. That can be good for a number of reasons. First of all, if you give everything to the step parent, there may not be anything left once they're dead for the children, okay? And why isn't there anything left? There can be a couple of reasons within the step parent's control and not within the step parent's control, okay? So first, that step parent may go through a medical assistance spend down. So if there aren't a whole lot of assets, and the end of life care is really expensive for the step parent, then a lot of the assets could be exhausted in paying for that care, and then there's just not a whole lot left for the kids after they die. And so that can be an issue. Maybe a step parent may spend it all, and so that can be an issue. And maybe they may not spend it all, but depending upon how you give it to the step parent, they may give it to someone other than the kids at their death. So that's another problem to think about. So it kind of becomes down to, what's the right dollar amount or percentage amount, so that, I'm taking care of my spouse, but I'm also taking into consideration my kids. And sometimes things to think about is how much money did people bring into the marriage, how long the marriage has been. You can also think about how much money does a spouse need to have their needs met for the rest of their lives. And maybe that's a certain dollar amount, and everything above that is going to go to the children. So those are kind of things that can help you narrow down into what the appropriate amount is to go to your children. So then it comes back to, how should I leave money to my spouse? And there's a bunch of different options, but to kind of boil it down to simplicity, you can leave it in trust or outright, okay? And if it's a trust, there's a trustee in charge of that money. You have to first answer the question of who is going to be the trustee of that spouse's trust, okay? So with blended families, sometimes I see that people list a bank. It's a neutral, nice third party, doesn't, make sure that the terms of the trust are going to be enforced. No hanky-panky is going to go on. Sometimes it's the bank and the surviving spouse, so that they have a seat at the table to talk about how it's invested and things like that. Sometimes it is one of your children and the spouse, to kind of have that check and balance of that your spouse isn't the only person with access to those funds. And sometimes it's just the surviving spouse. And so in that circumstance, you really want to make sure that you're on the same page with that spouse, that you trust them, that they're going to enact the terms of the trust, because they're the only one who has access to the trust to know what's going on. They have a duty to distribute the funds in accordance with the rules of the trust, but what if they don't? How is that going to be enforced? It means that your kids are going to be suing your spouse, which is never a situation that anybody likes, right? And it's expensive, and the kids may not sue the spouse, and so there's all these problems with that. The second thing that you have to decide when the spouse inherits is if you want it to go outright or in trust. Outright, the pros and cons of that is that it's really simple. It doesn't have tax planning, so it just depends upon what the size of your estate is, if you might owe estate taxes or not, whether that's worth it. But it's simple. You don't have to file a separate and different tax return each year. If your spouse inherits in a trust, then the question is what are the terms of that trust? Okay. Should your spouse be the sole beneficiary, or should your spouse and your kids be the beneficiaries so that the kids could also get distributions from the trust? How easy do you want your spouse to be able to take out the money from the trust? Oftentimes, I recommend that people, especially in blended marriages, have what's called a 5-5 power or something equivalent, where they get the greater of all the income or 5% of the trust each year. So they just get this automatically. And so there's no ambiguity on whether they should withdraw this amount or not. You could also make the percentage be less. You could do 4 or 3%. But the idea is that, the kids don't need to get their undies in a bunch if the spouse is taking the 5% every year, because that is what is required. Now, the question is in order to get the amount above that, are they able to do that? Okay. So in some tighter trusts, it would say, no, they can't get anything beyond 5% of the trust. They're going to just have to keep it in there, irrespective of what's going on in their life. A more loosey-goosey trust would say, yeah, they can get into that principal. They can get into that 95%. And then something kind of in the middle is they can get above and beyond that 5% if they show need. They don't have their own resources to support themselves. And they have this need. And so therefore, they're able to reach in above and beyond that 5%. Now, something else that's important with these types of trusts for spouses, especially in blended marriages, is are you going to be able to terminate the trust? So can you wave a magic wand, say, get rid of my trust because I don't need it anymore, and terminate, take all the assets out so that, I can give them all to my friend that I go to the gym with, or something like that. So if you make the trust easy to terminate, that is something to know. You want to have a higher degree of trust in your spouse. Also, what a trust does is generally at their death, at that point, it's going to flow back to your kids, or a percentage of your kids and your spouse's kids, whatever you have agreed to. But you can give your spouse, if you want, the ability to alter that. And so you can give them a broad ability to alter it or a narrow. A broad ability to alter it would say, yeah, they can give it to anyone. They change their mind, they can give it to their neighbor, they can give it to their friend from church, they can give it to their new husband. But a narrow way to write it is say, look, they can alter how these funds pass, but it must go to my kids. Okay. Or 2/3 must go to my kids, 1/3 can go to their kids. So that's a more narrow way to write it. They have to keep it within your family. Your descendants can't give it to a new spouse or friend or anything like that. So I generally find that people in blended families want me to write more narrow abilities to alter the beneficiaries. As you can see, there are a lot of considerations to consider in blended families. We help blended families all the time, and we'd be happy to help yours come up with a fair solution for what's going to happen. Just give us a call, or you can read more about what past clients have said that we've helped by looking up our Google reviews for the Yanowitz Law Firm. Thank you.